This is Floss Weekly. I'm Doc Searls, and this week Simon Phipps and I are talking to Jonathan Riddell of KDE Neon, and we cover that and a whole lot more. It's coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Floss Weekly, episode 635, recorded Wednesday, June 23rd, 2021. KDE Neon. This episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Melissa. With the world starting to reopen, you want to make sure that your customers' data is up to date. Try Melissa's APIs in a developer portal. It's easy to log on, sign up, and start playing in the API sandbox 24/7. Get started today with 1,000 records cleaned for free at melissa.com/twit. Hello again, and good morning, good evening, or whatever it is, wherever you are. I am Doc Searls. This is Floss Weekly, and I am joined this week by Simon Phipps himself. There he is with his Helvetica shirt.
Keyboard.
Yeah, for those of you.
I'm very upset, Doc, that you weren't horrified when you first saw it. Because
yeah, for those of you not watching your radio or whatever you're doing now, Simon has a black T-shirt that says Helvetica on it, and it's in some other typeface. I don't know what it is.
It's in Comic Sans.
It's in Comic Sans. Okay, it's a little. It's less than obvious, but that makes the joke even better. So you're in your bedroom now, right?
I am. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah. It's as you get older, you revert back to childhood, I'm told, and so I spent my childhood locked in my bedroom with a computer, and once again, here I am, locked in my bedroom.
Yeah. And you're in Southampton still?
I'm still in Southampton, where today the temperature is no longer freezing cold. The rain has stopped briefly, and there is a little bit of blue up there out the window.
It's I'm in New York, where it has been brutally hot the last few days, but we had a nice little rainstorm yesterday, and now it's cool enough for me to wear my jacket without looking too weird. So you can't tell with this black, looks black though, background, very weird. So our guest today is Jonathan Riddell of KDE Neon. You're familiar with I'm sure you are with KDE.
Yeah, I mean, KDE, it would be very difficult to be an open source and not be familiar with KDE. I have to say, though, that I am, of all your co-hosts, I am the one that doesn't actually use either KDE or GNOME, because obviously I'm on a Chromebook here, and so I don't have a desktop environment. And so I'm coming to this almost as an outsider, despite knowing far too much about the history of KDE.
Well, you know more than I do, and I'm terribly discrediting our show now, so we're hoping the back channel will help as well. I mean, I did a lot of reading before this show, though, so I'm looking forward to talking with Jonathan, and I think KDE Neon is an exciting project. But first, I have to let everybody know that this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Melissa. With the world starting to reopen, you'll want to get reacquainted with your customers, which means you want to make sure that your customer data hasn't gone bad. You want to make sure that your customer data hasn't gone bad. Did you know that 30% of customer data goes bad each year? Stop throwing your money away and let Melissa help you. Melissa makes sure your data is accurate and current so you reach the right customers. Their tools have helped businesses maintain fresh data for over 35 years. That's why over 10,000 businesses trust the address experts. With a renewal rate of over 85%, companies love Melissa, and you know they will work for you too. You can verify addresses, emails, phone numbers, and names in real time with Melissa. Melissa's global address verification service verifies addresses for over 240 plus countries and territories at the point of entry. Tired of having duplicate customer information in your database? With Melissa's data matching, you can eliminate clutter and duplicates, increase accuracy of the database, and reduce postage and mailing costs. Get the information that completes your customer profiles better. Add consumer demographic info to your records, such as marital status or social media handles. Melissa's flexible deployment options offer different platforms to suit any preference business size, or budget. With flexible on-premise web service, secure FTP processing, and software as a service or SaaS delivery options. Melissa also has their new Lookups app on iOS and Google to search addresses, names, and more at your fingertips. Melissa constantly undergoes independent security audits to reinforce their commitment to data security, privacy, and compliance requirements, SOC 2, HIPAA, and GDPR compliant. Melissa's Global Support Center also offers 24/7 world-renowned support if you sign up for a service agreement. Inquire today. Melissa is still supporting communities and qualifying essential workers during COVID-19. See if your organization qualifies for 6 months of free service by applying online at melissa.com. We'd also like to congratulate Melissa for being named a leader in address verification by G2 Crowd in their spring 2021 report. Make sure your customer contact data is up to date. Try Melissa's APIs in the developer portal. It's easy to log on, sign up, and start playing in the API sandbox 24/7. Get started today with 1,000 records clean for free at melissa.com/twit. That's melissa.com/twit. Okay, so welcome, Jonathan Riddell of KDE Neon. We're great to have you on the show.
Hi, thanks a lot for having me. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening.
Yeah, and for those of you not watching, a great background there. So give us the sort of high level on KDE Neon and where it fits in the general Linux distro ecosystem and differs from everything else.
Neon started. Oh, I can tell you a story. I was on a beach one day. We were on a beach in Venice, in Los Angeles. Beautiful sunshine, waves coming in, and there we were giving surfing a try. We had some surfing lessons. The waves come in. You've got to lie down on your surfboard. You spot a wave. You paddle along, and then you have to jump up once the wave is there. And it's a very active, dynamic environment, surfing on the sea. And most of us didn't get it. Most of us just fell in. And we said, well, wouldn't it be good if we could just pause the waves and then we could just stand up and then we could say, go waves, and then we could surf. The thing is, that's stupid. That's not how the world works. It's not how surf works, and it's not how software works, because that is what Linux distributions try and do. They try and pause the world and take software when it gets released, but only release it to the users 6 months later. And that's really a poor user experience. And it's one of a number of reasons why Linux on the desktop has not really taken off. And the other reason, of course, or one other reason is that there's a disconnect between the people who distribute the software and the people who make the software. And so we were sitting on this beach wondering, well, what would it look like if your open source operating system got to you in a smooth, continuous way? And we realized this is how the rest of the software industry works now, with continuous integration, continuous quality assurance, continuous deployment. It's all built in the cloud, and it's taken from the source, and developers write it. And when developers say commit, push it, there's a process where it's automated and it can get to the users quite often. And we wanted to try and recreate that with a Linux distribution. So we said, okay, we're going to be a KDE project. We're not going to be a separate project because we are KDE fans. We want KDE software to get to the users directly. And we're going to use the modern techniques. We're going to have a continuous integration system. We're going to build it all in the cloud. We're going to build it for users. We're also going to build it for developers as well. So that's the unstable code before it's been fully tested. And we're going to do it in such a way that it can get to users when they expect it, which is at the same time as it is being released. So, for example, I just released a new KDE Plasma release today, 5.22.2, wee bug fix release, and I got a complaint that, well, it's on the KDE website, but it's not on my Linux distribution. And this is a really poor end user experience, right? You wouldn't expect that from any other setup or any other type of software. Certainly, people on Windows and Mac and Android and all the rest, they wouldn't put up with a 6-month delay before they get their software. So with Neon, we said we're going to be setting up an integration system that it builds all the software, it scans it automatically, it builds it automatically, it does the QA checks to make sure it's not broken, and then it gives it to the users and they can upgrade immediately. In practice, this means that if you're a KDE fan and you love our software and you love our projects and you love the stuff that we make, then we're the project you want to come to, what you want to install on your computer so that you get KDE software pronto. So that it's not completely nuts. The rest of the system is largely stable. So it's usable as a day-to-day operating system for people who want the latest and greatest that comes out of KDE.
So I'm wondering why you chose the name Neon instead of, say, Surf, because that's a really great metaphor and a great inspirational, a great sort of origin story. Or Venice Beach, or something
Venice
like
Beach
that.
Or Muscle Beach, which was just next door. Or Marina Del Rey, that's the harbor on the other side of the beach. That's really lovely. We picked it. It was a pre-existing name is the answer, and it comes from physics because at the time it was fashionable to use physics terms like gluon or plasma for KDE projects. That was trying to fix the issue that there was a lot of really bad names with K's just thrown in there because people had poor imagination and they're not slick at all. So yes, the fashion at the time was to name things after physics concepts, and so we picked the neon atoms, and it happens to make quite a pretty looking logo as well.
Oh, that's great. It's very suggestive as well. So. So I'm wondering. There's a couple of questions here, and one is so there's a KDE branded Slim Book that came out in 2017, and then the Slim Book 2 in 2018. How is that doing? And you mentioned, the Linux desktop not taking off before, and it seems to me that with Apple going with its own silicon. Intel and AMD might want a Linux desktop or a Linux laptop to take off. So I'm wondering where that's at and if you're kind of at the forefront with that one.
Oh, I wouldn't claim to be at the forefront. I just know that when we started this stuff in the late 90s, early noughties, we were idealists and we wanted software to be free, meaning free as in freedom, and we expected that if we just filled in all the little gaps the users needed, so we just needed a good documentation, and then we just needed a good web browser, and then we just needed a good IDE so you could develop your stuff. If we just filled in all those little gaps, then we would take over the world, and there would be no more Windows or Mac. It would just be people running their favorite Linux distribution. And it hasn't worked out like that for all sorts of reasons. And these days I've sort of accepted it is not going to take over the desktop, but we're going to have fun carrying on trying it, and we're going to attract more enthusiastic, useful people, and we're going to help the world in the places that are there where we can. And my colleague made the point. There's a website called Pornhub. I don't know if you've seen it. I've not myself. Are you familiar with it? They make biology education videos. They're very popular, and they publish their stats, and they say it's about 2.5 to 3.5% users are on Linux, and so that's a small number. It's not taking over the world, but 3% of a massive number is still a big number. So we're still a significant movement, significant proposition, and we're still a thorn in the side to the proprietary competition. And you can get our stuff directly on hardware now through relatively small OEM suppliers. So Slimbook has a deal with KDE, where it's directly branded as KDE. It ships KDE Neon, and it's the place to go if you want a bit of hardware that it works with the software, because I test it myself. Pinebook is another one you've got there. So with Pinebook, that's a guy called T.I. Lim. He's in, I want to say Massachusetts in America. I could be wrong. He lives somewhere in America. He's got links with Malaysia and China. He knows how the world works. He knows how to put the bits together. So he's done what nobody else has apparently been able to do, which is create an ARM-based laptop, very, very low costs, but perfectly usable, perfectly good for everyday use in your daily driver. He's made the hardware, but he's not interested in software because he knows that's not his forte. It's a very difficult thing to do. And anyway, there's all this open source software stuff floating around on the internet. So he gets us to make images of KDE Neon, and a few other distros do it too, that work on his Pinebooks. And they're quite a unique machine because they're very cheap and low powered, but fully functional. And because KDE Plasma is a lightweight desktop now, because it's really optimized for working on ARM and relatively low spec hardware, it works really great. So that's been a really nice partnership too. And then Tuxedo is another nice one. They're a German company. They sell quite high-end laptops, and they sell it with KDE software on, and their stuff works really well. And just recently announced is Jingnos, the new Chinese company that has turned up, and they're making tablets, and their tablets use KDE Plasma, and they're hopefully going to be a big success. They've got a lot of people excited about it.
So it's quite interesting listening to all those descriptions there, Jonathan. The question I've got for you is, who is KDE Neon for? Back in the beginning of the 2000s, all of us in the free and open source software community were clear that we were going to knock out Microsoft and that Linux was going to be the desktop that everybody used. Here we are in 2021. None of my kids has a desktop. They all have a mobile phone and a gaming console. And so I wonder, who is KDE Neon for? Is it for software developers? Is it for culture warriors? Who is it for?
Well, KDE Neon specifically is for enthusiasts and nerds and fans and the beautiful people who use our KDE software, because that's what it focuses on as a project, and it gets the software out there fast and as it is meant to be by the original authors, unadulterated. And so we have a pretty niche market there. I'm not pretending I'm going to be taking over the world with that anytime soon, but it's doing software for the fans, and also we have a developer edition as well that builds directly from Git master. So that's the unstable, relatively untested code. So that's a dangerous driver to do it. I run it daily, usually works, but it has been known to break, of course. And that's really useful for people developing KDE software, because then they can dog food their own stuff and they know they've got the latest and greatest that they're working against. I would not necessarily recommend it for people who are not operating system fans. And most people are not fans of operating systems. Most people just want their computers to just work and stay relatively stable. So because we update KDE software every day, probably most people don't want to do that. We want to do that once a year, or preferably never. So I would tend to recommend something a bit slower moving for most people. Having said that, KDE Plasma is a very fully functional, lightweight, fast, responsive, customizable desktop, and we have some world-class software, which is occasional bits of it that are really successful, and some of it is on, well, it's increasing on many platforms as well. So when you ask who is KDE Neon for, very specifically, KDE Neon is for KDE fans. KDE itself, of course, is a massive project, and we support that through Neon by dogfooding a lot of KDE software. And the rest of KDE's output, KDE software, is for all sorts of use cases, because we're a pretty massive community now with wide and diverse output.
Right. So Jonathan Bennett on the chat is asking, and I think he's got a great question. So is Neon a rolling release just of KDE bleeding edge code, or is everything on there rolling release bleeding edge software?
It's just the KDE stuff, which is continuously integrated and rolling. So everything else stays on the long-term support based on Ubuntu long-term support edition. So that gets updated only every 2 years, unless we need to update some specific dependency that needs to be a bit newer. I recently changed it to run the hardware enablement Linux builds. So if you need a new driver, then those new drivers will come in as Ubuntu does those hardware enablement versions of Linux. So that's pretty useful if you've got, like my laptop here, AMD Radeon. That didn't work until I added those. So it's relatively new, but it hopefully has a nice balance between the latest KDE stuff, because that's what we love, and everything that's relatively stable. We have 2 other outputs of the KDE Neon project. Are you excited to learn what they are?
I'm very excited. Tell me.
So as well as the installable system, we also have Docker images, and that's because, well, for example, I'm running the developer version of KDE Neon here. It's built out from Git unstable, but often I want to test the released version because that's what our users use, and they say, oh, I've got an issue over here and I need to verify that. I don't want to reinstall my whole operating system. I don't want to dual boot it. That's too much faff. But these days we get containers. So we have Docker images for the whole desktop operating system. So I can quickly switch into a different edition of Neon or any other operating system I want to test, and I can install that and I can test it there. So I can run specific KDE apps or the whole operating system through Docker, and that's a really useful developer testing tool to make sure that our software is working as it should work. And the other output is containerized packages using Snap package format. And this is the new and up-and-coming package format for apps from Canonical. And it's apps done the way that people expect it to be done. They're just self-contained. They don't have any of these hundreds of different dependencies where you have to make sure that it's in the repositories that you're using. You can just install it on any operating system, any Linux distro. So as part of our Neon continuous integration builders, we also build a lot of KDE software as KDE Snap apps. And we've got over 100 apps available in the Snap store now. And KDE in general has a movement to move towards those app stores, because that's how users expect their software to be. And it has the interesting facet that we can actually see how many people are using our software, because the Snap store counts how many installs there are. So that's just a useful extra metric that makes us go, oh, okay, there are people out there who care about this. This is nice.
So, Jonathan, I may be crazy here. I thought that Kubuntu was Plasma running on an Ubuntu base. What is the difference between Neon and Kubuntu? They from the spec, they look like they're the same thing to me.
Yes, they're similar, but 2 differences. Kubuntu is released once every 6 months. So it will always be out of date compared to what KDE develops itself. And the other difference is that it's released as a separate project by a separate organization. So there will always be a bit of a disconnect between what the authors of the software want it to be and what gets in the hands of users. And we like to integrate ourselves with the developers as much as possible. I'm the release manager for KDE Plasma, so I literally make the releases of KDE Plasma, and then I can put them into KDE Neon directly, knowing how it should be updated, what new dependencies it has, what new features I need to be testing to make sure that they work. And then when there's issues, I know exactly the developers to go back to fix it. And that's how software ought to be done, much shorter cycles between testing, releasing, knowing what needs to be done. The disconnect that has always been part of how Linux distros work, I think it's been a barrier to kind of successful adoption.
Right. So who is making this software? What are people's day jobs that are working on this, and who's hosting the CI? How does all this work? Is this all magical hobbyist stuff being done in basements, or is there a big evil corporation making it all happen?
Oh, surely you've been around open source free software enough to know that's a dangerous question. I mean, does it have to be about money? We just want to have fun, take over the world, destroy the corporate interests. We want to change the economic system and travel to some nice places while we do it. I have the privilege of working on it being sponsored by Blue Systems. Blue Systems, you can look them up on Wikipedia, funded mostly by a nice rich guy. And I have an office in Edinburgh in Scotland. And again, that's just through the kindness of strangers. There's a company there who make Apache Brooklyn, and they're just open source friendly. And they just say, yeah, come on in and work from our office. And so I am largely dependent on the kindness of strangers. The build servers are mostly sponsored, I think, by a cloud company, DigitalOcean, maybe a couple of others as well. And yeah, in the spirit of KDE, there are enough people who want to be generous to us because we create wonderful things.
Right. So how many other people are working on it apart from you, and what do they do for a living? Are they all running GoFundMes, or do they have a day job too?
Harold Sitter is my main colleague. He works for Blue Systems as well. And in the background, all the KDE sysadmins set up a lot of the systems, and they do it mostly in their hobbyist free time. And we have small overheads.
Right. So this is pure Linux the way that everyone assumed Linux was before Linux Foundation existed that we have here.
We are the nerds. KDE is the original and best Linux on desktop project, right? We started in the 90s when we all thought we could take over the world. If we could just fill in the file browser, the web browser, put a panel on the bottom of the screen, make it consistent and nice. And since then, KDE as a project has expanded in its scope of what it will host. For example, there's so we redefined ourselves as a community rather than as a desktop, because of course the desktop had been completed. It was a relatively solved problem. And so we have other projects like Wiki to Learn, which is quite unrelated, but it's part of that same community spirit. We have projects that like Krita, which is a painting application for artists, and that works fabulous on Linux, but it sells a lot of editions on Windows through the Steam store and the Microsoft store, and they hire developers. They've got about 8 developers working on their project there. So we've got quite a large and diverse output in KDE, of which KDE Neon hopes to be one that takes our software directly to users.
So do you think you would say that KDE is Europe's answer to the GNU project?
No. KDE is... the GNU project was started by the Free Software Foundation back in the 80s. That was as a very idealistic project to replace Unix. And they've succeeded massively. And you add in Linux to that, and you add in X or Wayland, and you get us. You get us as the final picture, and that creates wonderful output. And we're still working on ways to new niches to try and fill the market. And we haven't succeeded yet, but this is our conference week. This is KDE Akademy week is happening this week. We've been discussing new ways to fill the market. For example, one way is with efficient software, so energy efficient software. There's a specification called Blue Angel certification, and KDE wants to be part of the Free Software Energy Efficient Project, FEEP, so that KDE software uses very low energy for the use cases that it specifies. It gets that certification, and that gets used by governments and other people, organizations interested in efficient, low-power software, sustainable software. So we're hoping that we can fill in just another little niche there in order to try and find some more people who, will start to depend on our software.
You recently posted about the OpenUK Awards, which closed admissions on the 13th of this month. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what prompted that, how it's going, what kind of submissions you got, what you're expecting to award, and kind of how that whole ecosystem is set up.
Oh, good news on that. We've extended submissions for that. So OpenUK is the industry advocacy body, non-profit body for open tech, software, hardware, and data, promoting it to governments and agencies throughout the UK. And we get into the halls of power, right? The last time I saw Simon Phipps, it was in the Houses of Parliament in Westminster in London. And we were on the banks of the River Thames as Parliament was self-destructing because Johnson was kicking out half his party, and many hundreds of thousands of people were protesting around London because they were trying to implement Brexit or something. And there we were in the heart of power, talking about free and open source software and how you can make government more efficient and bring in new competitive advantages to people. So that's just to give you a bit of background to OpenUK. We get into the corridors of power in order to promote open tech. And I recommend that everyone in the UK at least visits OpenUK website to see what's on and considers joining up and being part of the project. And the awards ceremony is a ceremony that we run once a year in order to celebrate and recognize the best of free and open tech in the UK, both people and projects, companies, agencies, organizations that do diversity. So we're looking for nominations now. They close on the 27th, I want to say. It's been extended too. So if you know people and projects with connections to the UK, please go to openuk.uk, nominate those, and there will be a ceremony in November. I can't reveal where, but it will be at the center of the world. Everybody will be watching when we have our ceremony in November. It's going to be extremely exciting. It's going to be in person as much as possible. There will be video streams. So I recommend that, if you know any project connected to the UK, do nominate it and then come along to our Open UK Awards ceremony in November.
And we'll put that in the show notes as well, so people will have the link to that. And is this the first time you've done the awards, or have you done them before? And if you have, what kind of you have a bunch of categories, right? You have like a list of categories, and I'm wondering what the winners tend to be, or have been in the past, if there is a past there.
Yeah, we did it last year. It was not in person, of course. It was hosted by me at Edinburgh Castle and Amanda, who's the CEO at the Shard in London. And it was quite a fun online event. And we posted out boxes of food, and everybody had a wee drink. And there was a young person's competition, and so the winners of that were also announced. The competition there had Imogen Heap, the musician. She makes electrical musical gloves, and she is a musician who uses these Maimu gloves to create electronic but also dynamic sounds. And she open sourced the mini Maimu glove, and we gave all those to the young people's teams. We had groups from various schools who had done different projects with those, creating different bits of music and different bits of artwork using these motion sensitive gloves. And we open source the code as well.
It just made me think we should have Imogen Heap on the show. She does amazing stuff, and you're into her music too, aren't you? Simon, I think.
Yeah, I am.
I think.
Yeah, I've been listening to her since she started out. She's a very she's a kindred spirit, I think, very much into the technology of producing interesting new things, and of course her thing is music. And I've been watching her gradually evolving those Mimu gloves and gradually experimenting with Bitcoin. That could be our Bitcoin link for today, Doc. And pushing doors and seeing new things happen. So yes, I'm a big fan, and I do hope you're going to invite me to join you on the show when you persuade her to appear.
Okay, well, yeah, you're just when we reach out to her. I think actually my wife may know her in some way. So I have a. We were talking about laptops and desktops earlier, and how we had all this optimism about it. On my own little back channel here, I was trying to find the earliest point at which I said in the next year in Linux Journal, because I've been with Linux Journal since the mid-90s. And a number of years, I said over and over again that this next year was going to be the year of the Linux desktop. We talked about LOTD and LOTL for Linux on the laptop. So, but the interesting thing is we have it. It just isn't huge, as you pointed out on that fun artistic site that is like 2%. For a long time, Linux showed up as 2% also because it's actually used an awful lot in the corporate world. So and there are a lot of corporate desktops out there. But I'm wondering if you could project into the future. I having had this last 20 years or whatever it's been of experience, and that we're living now in this sort of in between time, partly because of the pandemic. The pandemic has just thrown everything up in the air and kind of hit the big reset button on everything. But at the same time, we're also very dependent on these giant platforms. And it used to be when you talked about a platform, you're talking about Linux and Mac and Windows. And now you're talking about Google and Apple and Facebook and Twitter and things like that. But I don't, because I'm talking about this stuff all the time, but I'm wondering if you can anticipate out, if you're looking out 5 or 10 years or more, what are you seeing? Do you think that far out, or are you riding the next wave just the way you did when you were inspired by the Pacific?
I can't pretend to have the next big thing or know the answers. I know that it needs a lot more than what we thought it needed in the early noughties, where yes, we created the software, we created the desktop, and we created all the software, and so you could give it to a non-computery person who just wants to use it as a tool, which is most of the people, and it will work fine. And they will have problems with it, but they will have problems with Windows and Mac, and I don't think there's any more problems with it than that. So that works, but it hasn't taken over the world because it needs more than just the basic solution. It does need a sales force behind it. It does need integration between the hardware and the software. It does need, well, to find a new niche that isn't already filled, because the niches that are already filled will have very powerful and well-resourced organizations behind them. So, for example, I once got invited to go to Nigeria, to Kano in northern Nigeria, to discuss KDE and bring open source to this city, which is huge. It's 9 million people. But nobody's ever heard of it. And at the time, if you looked it up on Google Maps, it was just a crossroads in the desert. It was a 2-horse town to the rest of the world. But you go there, of course, and it's a thriving, busy, bubbling, innovative town full of passion and energetic people. And so their idea, both the university, and they had companies involved, and they had government involved. We had meetings with the state minister for technology, was, okay, we're going to embrace this open source thing. We're going to use that as a competitive advantage to fill a niche that isn't being filled by other places, and hopefully we'll put ourselves literally on the map. And they had built a giant skyscraper. There was a massive office there. It was 10 stories tall, and it had 3 big wings. And they said, we're going to fill this with open source developers and companies, and we're going to be part of the revolution that's about to happen. And of course, then Microsoft came on, and we have a difficult relationship with Microsoft now. But at the time, it felt a bit more simple, where they came in and they said, well, we're going to employ 1,000 people here, and you need to get rid of this open source idea. And that was the end of that, because they have an existing power structure. They already have lots of money. They already fill the market niche. And what we offer is good, but it wasn't good enough to take in the effort necessarily for most people to replace it. So all of that doesn't answer your question, other than to say that we need to find out what the next niche is that we can fill. We need to be the iPhone before the iPhone gets launched. When there is when technology is good enough that it enables a new sector, a new product, a new need to be filled, then we need to be there ahead of time. And we need to be there ahead of time with not just the well-running software and the well-running hardware, but also the salespeople and the government connections, and the ability to take it out to whichever consumers will be needing it. I have no immediate answers. One project that we tried to work on a couple of years ago was Mycroft, and this was a smart speaker before the smart speaker market had been well established, and it used open source software. And yeah, we went out to their offices in Kansas. Kansas City is not actually in Kansas State, apart from the third of it that is. This confused most people. And we made a version of KDE Plasma that would work on their next version of their smart speaker, which would have a little screen on it, so it would use Plasma widgets to answer whatever questions you wanted to shout at it at. And we thought, well, great, there's a new product, it's innovative, has real world use cases, it's going to be pretty popular, and maybe that'll be the niche that we need. Didn't quite work. We were so close, and Mycroft is great, and it's out there, and people can buy some of their output that they make, but they struggle to make it as fast and as slick as the now established players of Amazon and Google. But maybe next time we will find a new niche that we can fill, and we'll be there faster and slicker and smoother, and we will have the whatever power structures behind it are needed to get it out to users.
Yes. I mean, that's really the big challenge that I think is facing the whole free software open source movement, is dealing with power structures that don't share our values and working out how what we do interacts with them. So, all the things we're seeing about the use of free software by people who are then using it to erode privacy, or the use of free software by people who are trying to oppress populations. How has that worked within the KDE community? Have you been at all concerned about KDE being used by organizations or applications that are antithetical to the way you see the world?
Well, we can't be too dogmatic about it, because it doesn't help. We don't have the power, the ability to limit who can use our software. What we do have is we have our shiny selves able to promote the values that we do, and hope that other people will value those and use those. So we have KDE's vision includes privacy as a direct part of our vision. So that means all of our applications, there are people who go through all the applications made by KDE and say, well, is this sending off data out into the internet without the user being fully sure? And occasionally it turns out it does. When you go to the help about box in a lot of KDE applications, it lists the authors, and it downloads the photographs, the avatars for each of the authors, and of course that's an unrequested ping that the user has made to a server, and we know the owners of those servers, and we know that they don't particularly track people, but they could, right? it's best for users that they opt in that. So we changed it recently so that that's an opt-in feature. And there's been dozens of examples like that where privacy gets put into KDE software, even slightly to the detriment of the functionality of the software. So that's a bit of a hassle to users that they don't just see the pictures there of the people who made the software, but it's important for their privacy. And what were you asking? I was going to say something else.
I was really asking you about KDE's response to the ethical software movement. That was my encoded way of asking you that question.
Yes. So it doesn't help to be too dogmatic because we don't have the power to limit who can use our software, and to some extent we limited ourselves for far too long, and we still do, by saying we make Linux only software, even though most of our software is written in Qt and most of our underlying programs are written using programming libraries and techniques that mean that they can be cross-platform. So in limiting our software only to Linux and Linux distributions, that hurts us, and still does to a large extent, because it means our software doesn't get out to most people. So I've been advocating using all the app stores on all the platforms. And so we have a goal now all about the apps. At KDE Akademy conference this week, we've been discussing how to get more apps on more app stores, because that gets free software out to the users. We can't stop people being evil, but we can help them be less evil. We can help them be more ethical. We can undermine the competition, the proprietary competition, by being open source, and that's a competitive advantage. You could be evil with a competitive advantage like being open. And so yes, I'm all for putting our software on the Microsoft Store, the Steam Store, and that can give a monetary income as well, which can make it more sustainable in some cases.
Right. So I had a little go at doing that with LibreOffice, trying to get it onto the Windows and the Apple stores, and I found that was particularly challenging, both from a business perspective and also from a community perspective. So I wish you Godspeed with getting that activity worked out, and better luck than I have with the LibreOffice community. Do you worry at all about, Doc was mentioning before that platform is becoming synonymous with a web platform rather than with a chip platform. Do you worry that you're getting squeezed between the evolution of web platforms and of the diversification of desktop architectures and chipsets? With Apple, it's got its own CPU, and Google is making Chrome OS happen. Do you worry that KDE's niche is going to get nicher?
I don't think it will get smaller. I don't think it will go away. I think people will always use desktop software, and people will always use mobile phone software, and we have mobile phone software, right? We have Plasma Mobile, we have Pine phones now that work well with Plasma Mobile, an increasing number of apps for it. Moving KDE, moving our software output into being more web app based, that was done. OwnCloud did it. It was Frank. It was a KDE project, and he has made a very successful business called Nextcloud now, and they make entirely free software, AGPL, community friendly, fluffy, cloud hosted file storage, Office. I use it to store my MP3s and listen to the music. All sorts of online service, but it happened to get too big for KDE, so it was split off as its own project. But we're still friends. We still use it.
I'd like to go back to a little bit to the ethical question. This may not be an ethical one, but on your blog, you're not silent about being a Quaker, and also you're a canoe enthusiast. And by coincidence, I went to a Quaker college and married a Quaker girl and produced Quaker kids. Though I'm now married to a Catholic girl, she holds the record. But and masses are hardly silent. And I haven't been in a canoe in a long time because that girl is an indoor person. But I'm wondering to what extent that's influenced your work, or if it's tied into your work at all. I mean, because there's a kind of a natural or ethical angle to that, and you bother to put it in your bio, so it seems relevant to me.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody will care, but I'm very happy to answer the question. So I'm a Quaker. Quaker is a religion. It's a fairly non-dogmatic religion, not particularly needing to care too much about being Christocentric or having a god or such not, but it is based around silent worship, at least most of the European Quakerism is, and a shared sense of community, and the testimonies of peace and truth, simplicity, equality. And so I first got into free software because I knew Quakers, and we were a bunch of teenagers, idealistic. We would go and shut down nuclear submarine bases and protest against invading random countries. And then the governments would invade random countries and build nuclear bombs anyway. So we wanted to do more actively ethical building of community, improving the world. And open source software was the way to do that. So we got a bunch of us. There's a very small crossover between Quakers and geeks, and so we all knew each other, and we all grew up together. Many of us worked for Ubuntu when it first started, so that's how I first learned about Ubuntu, was through the Quaker Geek Network. Was this spaceman starting up a new Linux distribution, and it's going to be big. And so I looked into this new spaceman starting up a Linux distribution, which became Ubuntu, and I was into KDE, so I said, well, you have to bring KDE into that. So I worked hard to get KDE into that, and eventually created Kubuntu as part of that. So it's very directly related to me, and the ethics of building community, and it fitted in very nicely with the ethics of freedom and free software, and getting to travel the world. And one of the lovely aspects of open source software is that you get to travel the world. You get to meet beautiful people in cities all around the world. And whenever I travel the world, I will always try and go canoeing on the nearest rivers just to see the city from a different place. Often I'll bring some KDE developers out with me. And so we were in Bilbao the other year for KDE's Akademy conference, and just opposite the conference venue, there's the Guggenheim art gallery, which is beautiful. And some people went to visit the Guggenheim, but of course, I took a bunch of nerds to paddle along the front of the Guggenheim. It's a beautiful way to see a city. I was once in Oakland in San Francisco for a Ubuntu conference, and I hired a canoe there because that's the way that I like to see a city, and I paddled all the way across the bay just because you could. And there's a wonderful way to see a city, is to say, oh, okay, let's go and paddle to San Francisco, and then from San Francisco I paddled around Alcatraz, and the men in blue jackets waved sticks at me or whatnot, and they managed to get all the way back down to San Francisco and all the way back across the bay to Oakland, which is a major shipping lane, quite heavy currents there. And the guy in the canoe shop said, "Oh, don't go to Alcatraz. It's a federal protected zone. They'll shoot you with machine guns if you go anywhere near there." So I think I had a lucky miss there, and I gave me energy to take the conference forward.
That's a great idea. I used to live in the Bay Area, and it didn't even occur to me you could hire a canoe there, or I'm sure there were kayaks, but hadn't thought of it because I like to get close to the giant container ships and the roll-on, roll-off other ships there. They used to fly naval airplanes out of the Naval Air Station at Oakland too, which is kind of fun. Anyway, we're close to the end of the hour here, and we always close with 4 questions. And the first is there anything we haven't asked that you wish we had asked, so we could get that in before we close?
Oh, I had a few more points from the KDE Akademy conference this week, which is still going on for another couple of days. Some more talks on Friday, so people can still register, akademy.kde.org, and watch all the talks. It's, of course, online this year. Hopefully next year will be in person. So we were talking about moving to Qt 6, which is going to be probably an important focus of a lot of KDE for the next couple of years, and porting Framework 6. We're talking about low power usage apps. I mentioned those. Talking about Wayland robustness. So one of our developers has made it so that if Wayland crashes, the apps continue running in the background, and when Wayland pops back up, then the apps will pop back up. So no more of the nonsense where you do control of backspace and everything dies. Everything will hopefully continue working, even if your pesky proprietary video drivers crash your computers for you. And we had a very interesting talk about working from home and how KDE's Plasma Desktop helps you work from home with Do Not Disturb notifications, neutral background image while screencasting, keeping the screen on while screencasting, disabling night color when screencasting, a clock with multiple time zones. That's uber useful for online conferences, and a games night, origami night tonight. If anybody joins the KDE Akademy conference on tonight, as we're recording on Wednesday, you can join in with the origami lesson.
Wonderful. So a couple more. First is, it's a control question, but do you have anything to say about blockchain?
Only that the nice office that I worked from in Edinburgh, they have, as a secret side project, it's not a secret side project, as a little side project, they have a project to create Scotch coin, which is to create a new currency that will undermine the British state and create free and independent Scotland based on blockchain. Don't know if
as
it's
if
a good
the
idea
British state needs, as if the British state needs any more undermining. I mean, you know,
there's one more little thing that will do it.
The first blockchain-based country. That would be good.
Yep.
Invented golf, and then this. There we go. Okay, and the last two are, what are your favorite text editor and scripting language?
I like Kate, which is the KDE's advanced text editor, and Kate is available now on the Snap Store and on the Windows Microsoft Store and in your Linux distribution. And scripting language, I sort of juggle between Python, which we used a lot in Ubuntu in the early days of Canonical, and Ruby. Most of our stuff is written in Ruby now for KDE Neon.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful hour, and I hope we can have you back on again soon, and to tell us, how things have been surfing along for you.
It's been a real privilege. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks again. So, Simon, how'd it go for you, man?
I run into Jonathan in OpenUK events anyway. But KDE is a fascinating project. It's one of those grassroots projects from before the dawn of modern time that keeps on going and keeps on using individual enthusiast energy to do cool things. So I love hearing about what they're up to and where they're headed next. And I hope they carry on in their silent worship and quiet rebellion.
It's funny. Linux Journal in 1996 was a KDE on Debian shop, basically, and I remember we had a staff meeting. We had a staff then. We had like a lot of people, like 15, 20 people at that time, and I brought up with Phil Hughes, who started Linux Journal and still ran it at that time. That coming from the outside, I thought that. KDE looked a bit too much like Windows, and sort of accused it of knocking off Windows. And Phil and I got into this giant argument about it. After which, I don't even remember what the argument was about, except that afterwards Phil was just thrilled that it was an argument. All the staffers were like cowering in corners while Phil and I went at it, and Phil just thought that was great. And there's sort of that argumentative side of the Linux movement has always been interesting to me, that it's there. Anyway, yeah, so Yeah, it's interesting how far we've come in 25 years. It's crazy to think it's been 25 years, actually. Yeah, here we are, looking older, you and me. But not sounding that way for the most part. Our voices don't.
I'm better on radio.
Notice that. Yeah, I've always been better on radio. Well, this has been great. You got anything to plug there, man?
I'm really very low on things to plug. You know, I like people backing me on Patreon, but people don't seem to do that these days. So apart from that, hire me to help you create an open source program office. Visit my website. But apart from that, no, not really. How about you, Doc? What are you hustling on at the moment?
Oh my gosh! I just suggest people go to Customer Commons just to sort of see the new things that I'm into, which will be one of the reasons we're going to be rebasing ourselves for a while in Bloomington, Indiana. That we may bring in some people for guest positions on that one. That'll be kind of a fun thing. But just see what's going on there. Kind of the main thing is I'm tired of fighting all the fights on the web. I want to go start fighting fights in some new place. There's this metaphor of a red ocean and a blue ocean, and I'm tired of the red ocean. I want to go over to the blue ocean and fight there. So, and not even fight, just build stuff. And it's a small town and a big university that there are people there that want to do some of the things that I've been saying for 1,000 years. So, and do it in an open and free way. So it's all part of a thing. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, good luck to you over there in the red heartlands that you're headed to.
Yeah,
Doc.
We've done a pretty good job of like not being political today. While sort of treading around the edge of it, mostly in Scotland and the UK. That's you have to laugh at a certain point, as things get crazy. Anyhow, this has been great, Simon. Thanks for being on, and thanks everybody watching and listening. And we've got another great guest coming up next week, and as usually, I'm not prepared to say who that is. So I invite you to come back. And in the meantime, have a good time. I'm Doc Searls. This has been Floss Weekly. See you next week.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? I am Ant Pruitt, and I want to tell you about my show, Hands on Photography, here on TWiT TV. Each and every week, Thursday that is, I like to sit down and share with you the best tips and tricks that are going to help make you a better photographer. And it's not always about Photoshop. It's not always about just having the biggest and baddest and bestest camera. It can be the simplest of things like leave your eye open when you're looking through the viewfinder. All of these simple tips can really help step your photography game up. So subscribe to the show today. That's twit.tv/hop. And I look forward to talking to you soon.